You think medical progress is built on sacrifice? You're right. But you assume the people doing the sacrificing chose to. Most of them didn't. In 1956, on Staten Island, inside a state-funded institution for children with intellectual disabilities, doctors began deliberately infecting children with hepatitis. Not accidentally, not incidentally, deliberately. They extracted the virus from infected stool, mixed it into milk and chocolate, and fed it to kids who couldn't tell their parents what was happening because many of them couldn't speak. The children ranged in age from 3 to 11. The experiment ran for 17 years. And here's the part that will stay with you. The scientists responsible didn't hide what they were doing. They published it. In peer-reviewed journals. In front of international audiences. With full institutional approval. They won awards. So the question isn't whether anyone knew. The question is, how did that happen? To understand Willowbrook, you need to understand what it was before the experiment started. The Willowbrook State School opened in 1947, built to house roughly 4,000 children with intellectual and developmental disabilities on Staten Island, New York. By the early 1960s, it held over 6,000. The design capacity was a suggestion. The actual conditions were something else entirely. Wards meant for 40 children held 80. Staff were stretched so thin that children spent hours, sometimes entire days, lying unattended. Residents were fed, bathed, and changed on rotations so slow that infections spread before anyone could stop them. The floors were concrete. The smell was permanent. There was not enough of anything. Not staff, not space, not dignity. Hepatitis was endemic. That's not a metaphor. It was so thoroughly embedded in the institution that virtually every child who entered Willowbrook contracted it within the first year. The question wasn't whether a child would get hepatitis. The question was when and how severely. This is the context in which Dr. Saul Krugman arrived. Krugman was a legitimate scientist, a serious one. He was a professor at NYU, a recognized expert in infectious disease, a man who genuinely wanted to understand hepatitis at a time when almost nothing was known about it. In the 1950s, hepatitis couldn't be grown in a laboratory. You couldn't study it outside a living host. If you wanted to research it, its incubation period, its transmission, its variants, you needed infected people. And Willowbrook, Krugman reasoned, had infected people already. More than that, it had a captive population virtually guaranteed to become infected regardless. So his logic ran, if the children were going to get hepatitis anyway, wouldn't it be better to infect them in a controlled setting, under medical supervision, where at least their illness could be monitored and something useful could be learned? That logic has a name now. It's called rationalization. But in 1956, it got him institutional approval, parental consent forms, and a dedicated research ward. Here's how the consent worked. Willowbrook, like every institution of its kind, had a waiting list. Demand for placement far exceeded capacity. Parents in New York who needed residential care for a child with severe disabilities could wait years during which they managed often alone, without support, without respite, unless they enrolled their child in the hepatitis study. The research ward had its own separate admissions track. It had better conditions than the general population. Lower patient-to-staff ratios, cleaner facilities, more supervision. If you signed the consent form, which described the study in sanitized clinical language that did not use the word infect, your child got in faster. This was not subtle coercion. It was structural coercion. The families weren't threatened. They were simply shown 2 doors and told which one opened faster. Some parents later said they didn't fully understand what they'd agreed to. Some said they understood and felt they had no real choice. Some said they trusted the doctors because they were doctors, because they were from NYU, because the form said the research was important. The form said a great deal. None of it said, "We are going to feed your child fecal matter containing live hepatitis virus." What Krugman's team actually did in clinical terms was this. They created hepatitis inoculum, a solution made from the pooled infected stool of Willowbrook residents. They diluted it. They mixed it into food. They fed it to children in the research ward who hadn't yet contracted hepatitis. Then they watched what happened. In later experiments, they moved to injections, more precise, more controlled, injecting serum drawn from infected patients directly into healthy children to observe the difference in incubation times. And from this, they did learn things, real things. Krugman's team was among the first to identify that there were two distinct types of hepatitis, what we now call hepatitis A and hepatitis B, with different transmission routes, different incubation periods, different behaviors in the body. This distinction, which they confirmed at Willowbrook, is foundational to everything that came after. The hepatitis B vaccine, developed in the 1980s, owes part of its intellectual lineage to research conducted in that ward. So Krugman wasn't wrong that knowledge would come from this. He was wrong about something else. The argument that the children would have contracted hepatitis anyway is not an ethical defense. It is a statement about probability. These were not patients who had already been infected and were being carefully managed. They were healthy children, deliberately given a disease, because the disease was convenient to study and the children were convenient to use. The distinction matters. It's not subtle. A child who might get hepatitis is not the same as a child who has been given hepatitis. One of those is a tragedy. The other is a choice someone made on their behalf. Willowbrook's general population, separate from the research ward, makes the second layer of this story visible. In 1965, Senator Robert Kennedy visited the institution unannounced. What he saw, he later described to the press as a snake pit. Children sitting in their own waste, residents with injuries that hadn't been treated, overcrowding so severe that basic hygiene was structurally impossible. Kennedy was visibly shaken. His description of Willowbrook entered the congressional record. Nothing changed. In 1972, a young television reporter named Geraldo Rivera obtained a key to one of the locked wards from a whistleblowing staff member. He brought a camera. The footage he aired, children lying naked on bare floors, covered in their own filth, rocking and moaning in rooms that looked more like holding pens than hospital wards, produced national outrage. Some of those children had been in the research ward. Some hadn't. The hepatitis experiments and the general conditions were two separate horrors operating in the same building, and they reinforced each other in a way that's important to understand. The institution's dysfunction made the experiments possible, and the institution's scientific prestige made the dysfunction easier to ignore. Nobody wanted to look too closely at Willowbrook. When Krugman's work was being published, questioned, and defended in medical journals, the same institution was warehousing thousands of children in conditions that a congressional senator called a snake pit. These things were happening simultaneously. The research was not conducted in a clean, separate environment sealed off from the degradation around it. It was conducted inside it. Here's where the medical establishment's response becomes its own story. Krugman's work was challenged early. In 1966, the British physician Henry Beecher published a landmark paper in the New England Journal of Medicine cataloging 22 cases of unethical medical research being conducted with institutional approval in the United States. The Willowbrook hepatitis experiments were one of them. The response from the medical community was not unanimous condemnation. Many researchers defended Krugman. The journals kept publishing his work. NYU kept employing him. The argument made in his defense, that the consent was informed, that the knowledge was valuable, that the children would have been infected anyway, was repeated seriously by serious people in serious publications for years. This is not ancient history. It did not happen in Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia or some regime we can cleanly place outside the boundaries of civilization. It happened in New York. It was funded by federal dollars. It was reviewed by institutional committees. It was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The system did not fail to notice Willowbrook. The system noticed it, weighed it, and kept going. What Willowbrook actually reveals is a problem that has no clean resolution. The hepatitis B vaccine exists. It has been administered to billions of people. It prevents a disease that causes liver failure, liver cancer, and death, and that still kills close to 1 million people per year worldwide. The intellectual path that led to that vaccine runs, in part through Staten Island in the 1950s and 1960s. You can trace it. That is not a justification. Let's be precise. The knowledge obtained at Willowbrook could have been obtained other ways, over time, through research designs that did not require deliberately infecting children who couldn't consent. It was done this way because this way was faster, more controllable, and more convenient for the researchers. Convenience is not a medical necessity. But here is the harder question, the one underneath all of this. We live in a world built on medical knowledge. We take vaccines, undergo surgeries, receive diagnoses, trust treatments, all of it standing on a foundation of research that stretches back through history. Some of that research was conducted cleanly, some was not. The foundation does not sort itself by ethics before it holds the building up. You benefit from what was done at Willowbrook whether you want to or not. That's not a condemnation. It's just true. The vaccine in your bloodstream doesn't carry a label telling you what it cost, or who paid, or whether they had the option to refuse. The children at Willowbrook had no such option. They were given a disease. The disease was studied, the knowledge was used, and then, decades later, the institution was closed. The researchers died with their honors intact, and the story mostly faded into the footnotes of medical ethics textbooks. What does it mean to benefit from something like that? We don't have a clean answer. We just have the question and the obligation not to look away from it. The last resident left Willowbrook in 1987. The building still stands on Staten Island. It's part of a college campus now. Most of the students walking past it have no idea what happened inside. That's how it usually goes.